Welcome everybody to the live stream. Today I'm going to be purfling up my guitar. So I have one of my guitars here. I'm about to begin the process of attaching the purfling to the instrument. I was doing a dry run and I was making sure that I didn't have any gaps or any weird spots in my channel. I had only done this on the treble side so far. Just about to begin doing it on the bass side here momentarily, but to see what I'm talking about here, if you look closely, you might be able to see there's a tiny little spot right there that I had to sand out and clean up to get it to sit flat. There's a small little gap there, but as I sanded it, I was at least able to get it to sit flat under pressure. So when I begin clamping this thing up with my tape, it should go away, but that's the sort of thing I was looking for. I'll come over here and do this opposite side here. Got my handy Sumac tape roll for this job. I like to use white masking tape as I found that purfling doesn't actually need very much clamping pressure. So binding tape's a little bit of an overkill, and binding tape being more expensive, I like to save it when I can. The other thing is it has a tendency to rip out the grain of my spruce on the top of the guitar. If you look at how to find the grain structures here, I've found that binding tape will rip that grain right out unless you can do something to prevent that, and that's sealing off the guitar. So I've actually painted on a little bit of 50-50, 50-50 being 50% lacquer, 50% lacquer thinner, and that seals it off and protects that from happening. So anyway, with the purfling, however, I'm just going to use the regular white masking tape, and I'm going to use wood glue to adhere it. But first, I'm quickly going to come over here and I'm going to check out my bass side. Rip off a few strips of tape here, and let's get started. This is going to be covered by the tongue extension, so I don't feel the need to do any fancy miter work or anything like that underneath there. So I'm just going to bump up that piece of purfling up to my treble side piece of purfling. I'm going to tack that in place right there. So I'm going to get that guy tacked down. I'm just going to work my way around and see if I find any gaps, anything. I'm actually seeing a tiny one there. It's going to be so hard to see with the camera, but I got a little tiny gap right there. I'm not too concerned with it because with a little bit of pressure, I can flex it down and get it pretty seamless. And I'll just work my way around. I'll look for anything alarming. And when I kind of got a section covered, I'm just going to tape it down. That way my purfling stays tight and I don't have a bunch of overhang to wrestle with. If I caught anything alarming, I'd either sand the channel. I got a few tools I like to use. You can use a file or even like this little sanding puck. These are specifically made for the waist areas of a guitar, but I've personally found if I have anything weird, I can clean out the channel with this puck as well. If you're really careful and you don't slip or tilt it in any way, this little puck with sandpaper on it just works pretty well for me. I'm not seeing anything alarming that needs to be addressed, but I'll do a once over once I have this purfling fully tacked up. Okay, I'm not seeing anything alarming, so I am good to go. So now I've got this issue where, for those of you who build guitars, I'm sure you're familiar with this. I got a seam right here that I got to create. Well, ideally there is no seam. You get it totally seamless and you get that cut perfect. It can be difficult to nail, but a perfect miter can really, in my opinion, increase the cleanliness of the guitar pretty drastically. So, especially if everything else on the guitar is done really well, I think the clean miters are cherry on top for sure. So I guess this isn't literally a miter because it's not a 45-degree cut like this would be if I was going to cut that to be seamless, which again, it doesn't need to be because the fretboard is going to go right over there, but a miter would be like a 45 and a 45. It's really technically a butt joint. In this shop, we've just always referred to it as a miter as well, even though I suppose it's technically incorrect. But when I say miter, that's what I'm referring to. I'm really referring to the purfling butting up right there. I want that to be completely seamless. So there's a couple different ways that I've gone about this. I've done two methods. One is I've actually started the glue up process and I get everything glued and tacked down and perfectly tight and good to go. And then probably all the way up to approximately this tape line right here, and this tape right here. And then I leave about this much overhang. I do the same thing with the bass side, start my glue, work it all the way around, stop approximately right here, have the purfling good, tight in its final position, locked in place with a bunch of tape and glue, not gonna go anywhere, and then execute my miter. And the advantage there is I can get the miter really tight and like wedge it and force it in place. and this won't move or kick back or risk slipping because everything else is taped down pretty thoroughly. But there's an argument to be made for doing the miter right now. And I've seen and heard of a lot of people getting better results that way. I've taught this method. I've done it before. I've never done it on any of my own builds before. So this will be a first for me, actually. But I'm going to try to go ahead and do it that way first. And the thing is it's really low risk because if I mess it up, the Purfling's not glued on. So if I somehow miraculously went like way too undersized or like a piece of Purfling wasn't salvageable, I could just start over and do it again. So that's the advantage to doing the miter first. So I'm going to need some wood glue, a sharp chisel, a miter block, which I've got right here. And we'll be ready to go. Personal favorite chisel for doing the miters. It is a good enough of a mirror. I don't know if you can tell in the camera. It's got a good enough of a mirror, good enough of a flat that I can cut pretty well with that. All right, so whenever I do this, and whenever I teach the process of cutting a miter, the first thing that I do is I'll create a master. And what that means is I'm creating a piece that I'm going to call flat. And it's going to be perfect. It's going to be really clean. And I'm never going to cut from that piece again. All I'm going to do is I'm going to conform this piece and work on this piece if ever the miter looks bad. So if I continually test the miter and the miter's looking bad, I'm not going to modify the master. The master is good. I only am ever going to cut from the opposite piece. And the reason for that is it's less things to think about. If I made like a cut here and then a cut here and a cut here and a cut here and then I go to test, I don't know what caused my test to go awry because I cut from both pieces. So I create my master, I call that good, and I don't mess with it anymore. All of my cuts and my changes are going to happen from this opposite piece. So I'm going to create this as my master first, no particular reason. Does not matter which side you choose. All right, getting the proper height with your miter block can be pretty tricky. Especially if you have like multiple body depth sizes, you'll probably need multiple depths of these blocks. I don't have a great miter block size for this, so I'm kind of wrestling with the piece of Purfling. So what I'm looking for is if I was doing a true miter, a 90-degree cut, I would tilt this until I created a 90-degree in my chisel. I've even seen some people go as far as actually like get two magnets that are perfectly flat and square and put it up against a machined surface so that their chisel's like magnetized and they can make like a perfectly straight cut every time. That's pretty clever. I've not gotten to the point where I've necessarily deemed that necessary for this process, but I can find like the miters that I have up here, these 90-degree cuts I have up here, where that would be really beneficial. But for this right here, I think that'd be a little overkill. I find I can get this nailed pretty much every time. And really what this is about is even if you're not good at miters and you can't get a perfect miter every time, it's just about having high quality standards and then recognizing like, oh, that's bad. I need to just suck it up and redo it. That's what it's really all about. And once you see a good one, you'll kind of have that in your head and you won't let a bad one slip ever again. And if it's bad, just reroute your Purfling channel. It's really not the end of the world. So I'm going to get that mirror to line up as best I can. And I just take off a tiny little bit at a time and I try to keep it as straight as I can the entire duration of my cut. And that looks really good. I'm quite happy with that. So I'm going to call my master done. That's good. As far as I'm concerned, it's really square. Really clean cut. My sharp pencil is definitely the name of the game. Either get good at sharpening or get Will Bazar as your coworker. You'll be good. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create a flat on this end here, and I'm going to see if I can't get a seamless result, and then I'm going to glue them on. And that looks really good. Actually really square, really straight, no funny business. So I'm going to test that out. Then I'm going to do that by undoing this piece here, scooting along. The top's going to be much easier because I only have one seam to worry about and I only have one miter to worry about. So I could have a gap up here and it wouldn't be a problem because again, it's going to be covered by the fretboard. The back of the guitar is the one that I have to nail. I do have to make that perfect. So there'll be a miter here, which will be a literal miter. So 245s meeting a 90-degree. And then I will have a what I call a miter, but technically a butt joint down here. Another point that I forgot to mention is that when we do this, I offset my miter or my butt joint, the purfling, from the center, because a principle that Mr. Brian Galloup has taught pretty much all of his pupils is that if you put it right on the center, that's where your customer's eye is going to be drawn to, and they're more likely to find it. So if it's seamless, great. I suppose it doesn't really matter where you put it if it's truly seamless. But if it's really close to seamless, but potentially still visible, they'll be able to find it if you put it directly in the center of the guitar. So I've always thought that was a really nice tip. So that's why I'm doing it so far off the center. I try to be gentle because I don't want my fingernails to rip off the grain of the guitar. And if you look at the top-down view in between my two fingers, you don't really see anything, which is exactly where I want to be, right? It's looking, yeah, looking pretty good. So I am going to glue that in place. I'm only doing one strip of purfling on this. If you had two pieces in the channel, this process would be a little trickier. I've always been a fan of taking my time and pushing the piece of purfling tightly into the channel and ensuring that it's fully seated instead of just rushing right into taping it. Because if I just immediately tape that up, I could cause the purfling to twist or be manipulated in some odd way and not fully seat into the channel. But if I really make sure thoroughly and apply pressure to the piece of purfling and make sure that that piece is fully seated, I can take my hands off of it and it's not flinging out. You do that a few times and you force it in the channel to stay in the channel. And then after I know it's good and it's fully seated and not twisted, I'll apply my tape. And even when I apply my tape, I make sure I'm fully pushing it in the channel, pushing it down as well, and getting it in there. I've noticed that fully seated this way is much less of a problem than fully seated this way. So I'm much more anal about getting that fully seated. All right, almost lost my mitered side. This is definitely my mitered side. Much cleaner cut. Okay. And looking really good there. And another trick is to make sure when you're looking at it from this direction that there's no gap. Just because it's seamless up here doesn't mean it's seamless down here. And why would it be important for it to be seamless down here? Because if I see that there's a gap on this edge and I start sanding on this a lot, I might open up a gap. I want to make sure that even as I sand on this, I never open up a gap. I never want to find a gap. Because this is ever so slightly above flush, probably just about a thou above flush. All right, and now I'm gonna glue this guy in. My glue bottle is spitting out the right amount of glue here. Try to keep my channels clean. Dirty channels means more work later. Means more work on the binding too. Get that fully stuck in there. Pumped up as tightly as I can. I'm gonna push it into its partner piece as much as I can. Make sure that it's tight. I don't even know where the seam is anymore, honestly, so that's a good sign. All right, well, I can't find it, so I'm not even gonna stress about that. I'm just gonna start taping it up. Now, again, as I said earlier, the risk that I run now is if I pull on this piece, I could screw up my miter. If I pull on this piece, I could screw up my miter. So now's the time for me to be generous with my tape and really make sure I'm not gonna pull this out of place. And a tip that is often taught is alternating pulls, where you do one pull downward, one pull inward, one pull downward, one pull inward. I actually personally don't do that, and it's actually kind of contrary to what I teach. For newbies, I've always taught that, do the alternating pulls. For myself, I really found that rubbing my finger over back and forth multiple times, making sure it's fully in that channel, making sure it's fully seated, and then again, I should do that enough times that it's tacked enough it doesn't even need tape to adhere, and then I just use the tape as bonus to, I suppose, make sure it doesn't get ripped out when it's sitting during its dry time. That's always been my take, and I felt that I've gotten really good results with my binding and purfling. All right, now I just finish up the glue up process. Really, all that's left. Okay, this is the whole section that I have glued. So again, I'm just gonna put tape over there to secure this in place, and then I'll just finish the job. And I gotta be careful not to pull on this piece because I don't want to pull my miter out of place. Now the rest of the job I can just finish pretty quickly. There's no reason to be overly gentle with it anymore now that the miter is out of the way. That's really the big ticket item. The part you really want to slow down for. Actually, you know what I need and what I forgot? Well, I didn't forget. I actually always come here in my paper towels. I thought I forgot, but then I realized I did it. And I just make sure it's fully seated in that channel. Tape got all wound up there. I go back and double check, make sure it's fully seated in both directions, this way and that way. Right. This is my first nylon crossover build, so gotta be really careful with this top. It's a pretty thin top with some pretty thin bracing. All right. Honestly, might as well just finish it out the rest of the way. Again, there's no reason to work in exceedingly small sections. Actually, I do need a little space up there because my piece is oversized, so I need some room to make my cuts. So I'm gonna only glue to about there. There's really no crazy rush, and I need to panic. I get a lot of students that like the second they get glue on their guitars, they start losing their minds. There's no reason to do that. You got good working time with Type Bond. I'm making quite the mess here. I know I just said for it clean. I'm gonna have to get a wet paper towel here. It's that waistline that'll always get you. You want to make sure that waistline's with a section of the purfling in the waist is really tight. Be thorough there. I spent quite a bit of time on that section. And again, if anything goofy happens when you do this job, don't hesitate to just route the purfling off and do it again. Let me throw this away real quick. I'm gonna begin my cut and glue up that final section. Again, this last cut just needs to be a nice little butt joint. I do not need it to be anything crazy good. Just needs to nicely butt up against that purfling piece right there. And I can mark it with a pencil. And again, this does not need to be perfect. More. My last little section there. And good. And I will do the treble side in the back off camera. But that is how you do a purfling job. So that's the extent of it. All right. That's it for the live stream tonight. I will see you guys next Thursday. All right. See you guys.